Scribbles, and I'm coach of the Colorado Cobalions, and welcome to the draft recap video. Taking a look at the league settings here before we get into the individual picks, there's a few things I'd like to point out just to keep everyone on the same page. Mount Silver is doing a pseudo-tiered points. I think they call them staggered points. I'm not really sure exactly how to describe it, but basically you have a set number of points as well as specific tier requirements to choose from. When we go to the actual draft board, I'll describe that in a little more detail. Aside from that, we're allowing Mega Pokemon this season, which is an interesting wrinkle. We are also limited to 105 points with 10 to 11 Pokemon. Aside from that, all the rules are pretty standard. We're not doing Dynamax or Gigantamax. We're not doing any sort of Z moves. The Tom Pass is Dry Pass only. I don't think there's anything else too crazy. There's specific Pokemon that are legal but have interesting rule restrictions, which makes valuing them pretty difficult, I would say. And other than that, the league is set up with tiered divisions based on skill. And I will be competing in Tyranitar this year. I was in Tyranitar last year, which is the top of the 3 divisions. Each division will run 16 players with 8 players making the playoffs. Last season ended up squeaking into the playoffs and then narrowly losing in round 1 to the eventual runner-up. So I'm hoping to improve on that this season, but we'll see how it goes. A lot of really talented players in the league. So going over to the draft board, this is kind of where you always start your scouting in the league. A few interesting wrinkles. You can see the 1 max tier here. You're allowed 1 of these Pokemon. 2 max tier, you're allowed 2 of these Pokemon. 3 max, you're allowed 3 of these Pokemon max. Below that, you have a kind of free tier, which you're allowed any number of Pokemon. And then you are only allowed 1 1-point Pokemon, which it looks like the screen I've got to set up is cutting off. But suffice it to say that they were a bit more careful about the 1-point Pokemon this season, and the Pokemon viable or kind of draftable in that tier were very, very limited. So this leads to some interesting wrinkles in your draft strategy. Our point total is also 105, with what I would say are fairly inflated points for all the Pokemon. So this generally makes the teams quite a bit worse than what you're used to in other leagues. The interesting Pokemon that are allowed in this league, Cinderace with Libero is allowed. It is 18 points because of that. We allow Darkrai, Ash Greninja, Protean Greninja, Mega Alakazam without Nasty Plot, both Mega Latios and Latios. They are linked to, they're the only Megas that are linked to their non-Mega form, so if Mega Latios is drafted, Latios is taken off the board, and same thing with Latios. Other interesting Pokemon that are allowed, trying to think if there's anything especially noteworthy. Kyurem Black can't run Dragon Dance, and it's allowed. I think that's about it. Mega Blastoise is down here with no Shell Smash, which is interesting. Mega Kangaskhan with no Seismic Toss. Just certain things like that. Nothing too out of the ordinary, I would say. Zygarde can't be Zygarde Complete, which I think is a fairly normal rule set. Immediately looking at the board for myself, I ended up rolling second pick, which is unfortunate. For one reason only, which is Mega Latios. Mega Latios is so fun to use. It's such a good Pokemon. I knew the second I got second pick I wasn't going to get it, and that kind of informed my initial draft strategy. I wanted Mega Latios. It's so fun to use in draft format. It's an amazing Pokemon for bulky offense, which is a very successful archetype in draft. And the fact that I was second and I knew I wasn't going to get it kind of put me in a really awkward position to start the draft. From there, when I knew I wasn't going to get Mega Latios and I knew I couldn't trade into the first pick, I kind of started to think if I wanted to trade back from second pick or what I wanted to do. I took a long look at the draft board and decided that there were about 6 Pokemon that I thought were kind of in a tier up from the others. Those 6 were Dragapult, Mega Latios, Dragapult, Mega Latios, Ash Greninja, Protean Greninja, and Cinderace were the 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. So those were the 6 that I thought were significantly better, especially as an early pick, than pretty much everything else available. And so I was willing to trade back to anywhere in the top 6 to make sure I got one of those and then still get earlier picks on the return. I had offers for 9th, 11th, 13th, I think, and all of those were outside of the top tier. So I ended up sticking in place, and that kind of informed my strategy going from there. Looking at the board overall, some of the Pokemon that I thought were good value, again, top tier, I think they're pretty similar value. You can see things that are bad value versus good value. I thought Clefable, moving down from the top tier this season, was good value. Similarly with Zeraora, I thought that was interesting value. Spectrier it's an interesting Pokemon. I don't know how well it would do in Draft League, but its speed tier and its offensive and defensive capabilities are really nice. Kind of scrolling out throughout the rest of the list. Galarian Zapdos, I think, is a really good Pokemon in Draft League, but it is also pretty expensive. So that one was a bit difficult for me to kind of get a grasp on. Trying to see what else caught my eye when I first glanced at this. I did notice there's a pretty strong tier of Megas right at 11 points, which is a little unfortunate because it eats up one of your 3 max slots here. So Mega Aggron, Mega Houndoom, Mega Manectric, Mega Sceptile, Mega Sharpedo, all kind of sitting at this 11 point tier. And the Megas below that, none of them really called to me. So I kind of anticipated I would be needing to use a Mega slot on one of my kind of tiered Pokemon, but that was one of the initial perceptions I got looking at the draft board. Other than that, Pokemon that I thought were good value when you start looking further and further down, I liked... I had some notes on this, but I've since been recording this a little bit later. I liked the value on Hariyama at 6. I liked having... I like Basculin at 3. I think Basculin's actually a really strong Pokemon with Flip Turn. It doesn't do a lot, but for 3 points it can fill a really nice role on a team. I think Audino is good value at 3. The 1 point Pokemon that I was considering were Dottler, who is cheap with webs and is a great Eviolite user. Wartortle, who's a good Eviolite user. But other than that, the 1 point tier looked really, really bad. I'm trying to think if there's any other value picks that really jumped out to me. I don't think so, looking at the board overall, which was fine with me. It is kind of hard to identify a lot of value, and I was much more focused on kind of my overall team synergy because I was going to have an early pick. So after looking at the draft board, I didn't really have too many strict plans going in. I knew what I wanted second pick, and we'll get to that in a second, and I kind of just built around it from there. So first pick for me, second pick overall, I ended up selecting Dragapult. And the reason I went with Dragapult is I think it's really has a really diverse move pool. It can support a lot of different archetypes, and knowing that I wasn't going to get Mega Latias, and knowing that kind of all the Pokemon in that tier I described were not amazing necessarily on bulky offense, they were all pretty flexible. So I picked Dragapult because I thought it was the most flexible, provided a lot of utility to the team. Great speed tier, decent bulk. It's kind of got the same stats as Zeraora, or very similar. And Zeraora can generally be EV to kind of take any one unresisted, or any one not super effective hit, which I think is a really useful amount of bulk. And the speed just means that you can invest in bulk pretty much exclusively. So all that extra speed effectively is bulk. Dragapult also provides things like U-turn, dual screens, a lot of status options, 2 great abilities in Clear Body and Infiltrator. I think it was a really easy mon to build around, and knowing that I'd be at the wheel, I was pretty comfortable taking Dragapult as a first pick and going from there. So I take Dragapult second, and the draft kind of swings around to me. The Pokemon I'm really looking at for my next pick were, I wanted to pair Dragapult with Breakers, really strong Breakers. And I thought that one of the best Breakers I could possibly pair Dragapult with was Mega Gardevoir. So Mega Gardevoir dealt really well with the opposing dragons that could threaten Dragapult. It also was able to break on the special side, which Dragapult can kind of do, but it doesn't do as well. And its typing was just good. You kind of start targeting that Dragon Fairy Steel core. Unfortunately, Mega Gardevoir was selected a few picks before me, which left me unable to draft Mega Gardevoir, which was a bit tilting, but I did know kind of the other direction I wanted to go. I wanted to go with Breakers and I wanted to go with Hazards. And so I ended up taking, with my second pick, Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn and Dragapult, they don't have necessarily amazing synergy with one another. You have 2/3 of a Dragon Fairy Steel core. Ferrothorn has options for basically a lot of hazards, and it is able to switch in on pretty much everything that threatens Dragapult. Your fairy types, your dragon types, which is really nice. And then hazards with Dragapult, I thought was going to be really good, especially if I could eventually pair it with Breakers. So the strategy for the draft was Dragapult, Breakers, Hazards, and just kind of run with that. And more or less what I was leaning towards was to use Dragapult in a way that I haven't seen it used too often, which is more as a late game cleaner or something along those lines, rather than necessarily something that's trying to break. Because I don't sense that it's a great breaker, and I don't sense it's a good support. I talked to people and people felt they always had to use Scarf on it because you'd have opponents running Scarf against you, and I felt that Dragapult with Breakers and Hazards was a really strong archetype, and that's what I wanted to build towards. So Ferrothorn was a pretty obvious second pick. Now my third pick is kind of where the draft took a turn. So at the third pick, I went with Melodic, and this is a reach on Melodic for sure. The reason I went with Melodic is I thought that I might be able to pick up a strong fairy type on the way back for my fourth pick. Sylveon was available here, Tapu Lele was available here, and I was okay with either one of them, and I thought Tapu Lele would make it back to me. I knew Melodic would not make it back to me, and the reason I wanted Melodic is it gives me a water type. A bulky water is just really, really nice. Gives me something to switch into fire attacks with Ferrothorn. It also has a competitive ability, which synergizes pretty well with Hazard Stack, just in general. And it has pivoting, which I think will be really nice with any breakers I draft later on. So I thought Melodic was really strong for my team, even though I think it is definitely a reach at this particular pick in the draft. So I'm hoping that I get a fairy coming back to me, the goal being Tapu Lele. Funny story, Tapu Lele doesn't make it back to me. So this puts me in kind of a scramble mode at this point in the draft. So initially, what I had kind of been looking at was I wanted a Mega Pokemon that could break. And so Mega Pokemon that could break that made sense to me. I really liked Mega Houndoom with Ferrothorn and Dragapult. I thought that it had amazing synergy with Dragapult, and Flash Fire with Ferrothorn was spectacular. I really wanted Mega Gardevoir, but I didn't get that. That pretty much left, in my mind, Mega Medicham, who at this point in the draft, most teams had a Mega and most teams didn't want a fighting Mega, definitely. So I realized I'm probably going to end up with Mega Medicham, and I'm going to be able to draft it late. So I started kind of filling out the rest of the team. Rotom gave me a ground immunity, gave me a flying resist, which my team didn't have. It gave me more pivoting. It gave me some form of hazard control, which I'm not necessarily in desperate need of if I'm going for hazard stack, but it's nice to have for matchups where that just doesn't work. Also gave me an offensive fire type. It's not the best offensive fire type, but it does decently well. And I liked its just general bulk, and its speed tier fit in pretty nicely above Melodic and below some other mons that I had been considering. So I thought Rotom was pretty good value here, kind of an inverse of the Melodic pick, where Melodic was maybe a round too early, or maybe a half round too early. Rotom's probably a half round too late at this point. So I'm happy with that value, and I'm starting to settle into, I'm going to end up with Mega Medicham at this point as a physical breaker, and so getting another special attacker felt pretty nice, and more pivoting as well. Seemed like a good direction to go into. So my next pick was Ribombee. Ribombee gives me webs. as well as a speed tier near Dragapult to kind of force a lot of the mons in this area to not run Adamant or Modest, anything over base 100, which is nice. Mostly it's just for the webs. Sticky webs with the rest of my team, specifically Dragapult and Mega Medicham, were going to be really nice. It's going to protect Dragapult against opposing Scarfers, and it's going to allow Mega Medicham to outspeed a lot of opposing Pokemon and really start to do damage. The Fairy and Bug typing is kind of nice. I don't have either one of those, and Fairy typing actually ends up being pretty nice for the team. I complete like a really weird Dragon Fairy Steel here. Ribombee is not the best Fairy. In a different world, this is Sylveon, and the team maybe looks a little bit better in that regard, but this is kind of the world that I'm in now, and the draft is kind of pivoted, and it's now firmly on this direction. Ribombee does other things. It has a U-turn, so another Pokemon with momentum. It can actually be fairly threatening with Specs or via Quiver Dance, so it has some other options. Its statuses, it does a lot of kind of nice things that you don't think about really, and then just the speed tier is amazing. So after Ribombee, I went in to go with Obstagoon. And the reason I want to go with Obstagoon is I knew I needed a normal type to pair with Dragapult. I really wanted to dissuade Ghost, and I wanted a dark type to pair with Dragapult. Obstagoon happens to be both. It also has 3 amazing abilities. Reckless, or moves like Double Edge, is really, really good. It has Guts, which allows it to be a really good physical wall breaker. And it also has Defiant, which along with Melodic gives me a second Pokemon that punishes Defog, or any equivalent move. And I think that's really important. If I'm going to be hazard stacking, specifically with webs and with spikes from Ferrothorn, the more ways I can punish Defog, the better. And I think Melodic and Obstagoon do a very good job of that, while also accomplishing a lot else for the team. Obstagoon is also going to allow me to switch into Ghost type attacks really, really well, and also threaten the bulky Psychics that Mega Medicham won't be able to break through. So I think Obstagoon has good synergy with the team. I'm not really sold on it as a Pokemon, but it has a good speed tier. It has pretty good bulk, and the attack stat is okay, especially if I'm pretty much always planning on getting more out of it via its abilities. So either Reckless or Defiant or Guts. It's always going to be punching above its weight, so to speak. After Obstagoon, I went with Weezing. So Weezing gives me another pseudo ground immunity. Ground seemed like a bigger concern for me for a while. I eventually was able to pivot away from it, but this gives me a physically defensive Mon, which pairs nicely with Melodic, and who is good on both ends, but is slanted more towards special defense. It gives me Toxic Spikes, which for hazard stack, you pretty much want all the options available to you. It gives me a decent switch in to some of the physical attacks that might come at Ferrothorn in terms of like fighting or something like that. Mostly it's Toxic Spikes is why I want Weezing. It was one of the best Toxic Spikers available that didn't overlap with other stats already on the team. Next up, with my 8th pick, I took Sandslash. I think if you're going to be hazard stacking, you want Rapid Spin support. Not having Rapid Spin with hazard stack means that either both sides are playing with hazards, which isn't necessarily the worst. If you build your team that hazards don't affect you as much as the opponent, you can really put the onus on them to remove hazards. My team is pretty good against hazards. Rotom isn't the best against rocks, but it can run heavy duty boots. But I still think it's important to have a Rapid Spinner, just in general, on a hazard stack team. And in this particular case, Sandslash gives me not only a Rapid Spinner, but it gives me an electric immunity, so that things like Volt Switch just aren't free against me, which the team's going to end up depending a lot on momentum. And so I have to try and maintain momentum while playing. Sandslash is also interesting as a Scarfer. The 65 base speed is just above where you need to be to have kind of viability as a Scarfer. It does some cool things, but again, mostly for rapid spin is why it's on the team, and electric immunity. Next up for me is Wartortle. So Wartortle is a 1-point Pokemon. I kind of need to fill out the roster. You have to draft a minimum of 10 Pokemon, and I'm pretty much up against the roster cap. Wartortle is Rapid Spinner, which is cool. It's a decent Eviolite user. You can see the 80 defense and special defense. It gets a good amount of bulk. It overlaps quite a bit with Melodic, so I think the only time I would bring it is if I needed a Rapid Spinner that, for whatever reason, Sandslash wasn't viable. It's pretty niche. If I didn't have to draft a 1-point Pokemon, I would have spent a 1 point elsewhere. I would have probably used 8 Pokemon rather than 10, but the draft rules set it this way, and so this was kind of the best 1-point Pokemon that I could find for the team. And then last but definitely not least is Mega Medicham. So Mega Medicham isn't necessarily the breaker I wanted to pair with Dragapult at the outset of the draft. I think it's really good, and I think the two of them work really, really well together. The Mega Medicham can't beat Ghost types, and it can't beat bulky Psychics. Those two things Dragapult can tear apart. It needs pivoting. So I have Rotom, Melodic, Ribombee, Dragapult, a bunch of mons that can pivot it in. It does well with Hazard support to help break Pokemon. I've got a lot of Hazard support. It does well with webs. I've got probably, if not the best Sticky Web user, one of the best Sticky Web users. I've got Toxic Spikes. I've got good pivots. I think Mega Medicham fits really well on this team. If you ask me what my team looks like going into the draft, it would have looked nothing like this. But I'm pretty happy with the end result. I think the draft I had made was something like Dragapult, Mega Gardevoir, Darmanitan, what else did I have? One of the Nidos, I think, was something that would have been nice. Just kind of things like that. But once I didn't get Mega Gardevoir, it kind of sent me spiraling, more or less. And I don't think ending up on Medicham with the rest of this team is necessarily the worst outcome. I think the team is interesting because it's not going to be bulky offense, which will be the first time I played a draft league team that just wasn't bulky offense. This is definitely offense. And it's going to be interesting building offense and kind of getting used to what an offense team looks like versus what I've played before. And so I think there's going to be some growing pains. I think the Tyranitar division this year is stacked. There's not any free wins by any means, and my schedule is brutal. I think if I had to pick like the teams I didn't want to play based on the draft results and what I know about the players, the 10 people on my schedule would be the 10 people that I wouldn't have picked, basically. So that's a little bit intimidating, but we'll see how it goes. It's going to be adjusting to a new draft league style and playing in a really tough division, so we'll see how it goes. I haven't missed playoffs in Mount Silver up until this point. I think that's in danger. I really think that's in danger this year, but we'll see. And if things don't go my way, there's always pivots that I can make with the team. I don't know if I can go to bulky offense, but who knows? Maybe I'll fall in love with offense and it'll be a great time. And if nothing else, my battles will be quicker, which is a great relief. Don't have to sit there stressing for an hour. But that's it for me. You can leave your comments below on the team. If you have any thoughts about kind of mistakes or things that you would do differently on the draft, or if you're kind of curious about picks I made, I'm happy to discuss them. I know this was a stressful draft for me, so definitely open to criticism or comments here. But it'll be an interesting season, and I look forward to it. All right, talk to you guys later.